Welcome to the Directing Animation Livecast with Scott Weiser. In my many years as an animator and director, my most defining projects have been my short film, Layers, along with Vanishing Ink and Cirque de Solitude, two books which I wrote, illustrated, and pitched at several studios as feature films. And I have more of these feature film pitches coming soon.
When many people find out that I work in the animation industry, one of the first most common comments I get is, well, if you ever need voice actors, I would like to try that. And I can understand why people say that. It sounds really exciting. Animation is wonderful, and it sounds like something that you could do it. You could get into the industry really easily because everybody has a voice. However, voice acting isn't as easy as it's cracked up to be. And that's why I have guest Stephen Weese on today. He is the CEO over Marvelous Spiral Studios, which provides voiceover services for film, games, television, ADR, dubbing, etc. And he has 20 years experience in academics and teaching. His roster in his studio is about 70 voice actors. So I'm really excited to have him on and discuss the art of recording voices for an animated film. Welcome, Stephen. Is there anything you'd like to add to the...
Hey, yeah, well, thanks for letting me come on and talk with you. I really want to talk a little bit about how it all started, because I think that some people probably, one of the most common questions I get, well, how do I become a voice actor? It's like,
yeah, exactly.
Well, so one of the big things I did is, of course, I moved to Los Angeles, I think it's 14 years ago now. And that, it really helps to be somewhere like that. Now it's a little different with remote studios, and COVID kind of changed things a bit, but still really most of the opportunities are in the, LA or maybe New York, stuff like that. But I got my first break to be in an anime called Hellsing Ultimate, which is a vampire anime. And I got to do a bunch of what's called incidentals. Incidentals are characters with a few lines, like 3 lines or 2 lines, or you're making sounds like Hellsing is a violent vampire anime where lots of people die. So myself and the director, Taliesin Jaffe, were in the studio, and my friend Jason Charles Miller, we took turns being all the people that got horribly killed. Because someone basically in this episode, someone sent a SWAT team after the vampire. And of course, the SWAT team is horrifically massacred. And so we're just all these SWAT team guys getting killed in different ways. So you can get in, and incidentals are almost like it's only being an extra in voiceover, right? Because you have a few lines or sounds, but that's it. There's also something called Walla. We can get into that. But anyway, so I started out in anime, and then after a while, I saw that it's pretty hard to get in just as a voice actor, so I started learning other skills where I was, I learned screenwriting, I learned to do production. And in 2013, I ended up getting in contact with the very first Kickstarted anime.
Oh.
And it's called Kickheart. It was made by Production IG. And somebody suggested, hey, they should have a stretch goal for English dub, because it was originally just going to be Japanese. So I contacted them and I said, hey, I know these big voice actors like Richard Epcar, a friend of mine, and I said he can direct it and we can do this. And so that was when I first dipped my toe into production, really doing, getting everything set up for dubbing this anime. And then after that, I realized, hey, wait, I could probably do this in a more formal way. And so I started setting up the company, and I've done video games and animation, and I've done children's shows. And one that was fun to dub is actually you used in your promo picture, The Diary of Beta and Cora. It was it was a stop motion animation done in Spain. So we dubbed it into English, and it was really interesting to hear the difference. In Spanish, I'm used to hearing sort of the Mexican variety of Spanish, but right now it was like, oh, this is Spanish, or Spanish.
Yeah, it's different.
Yeah, very different. But so we dubbed that, and then I've just been getting, what we do now is I moved my company to the East Coast. I moved it to North Carolina, and the idea is I've got a local roster of actors, as you mentioned, and I've trained them for video games and animation. And but we're able to, because real estate and everything is so much less expensive here, we're able to basically offer the same product, but at like 60 to 70% of the cost of LA.
Yes.
And so that's my brainchild to try to get this off the ground. And so we're on our second video game now, and we've got a commercial. We're doing some tech commercials also, but we're trying to get just get more clients and stuff. But since I have the like over a decade of LA experience, they're still going to get the same thing. I've just moved to a different location.
Right. Yeah, that's very similar to me. I live in Utah and right now, but I've worked in the animation industry in LA and in Vancouver. So yeah. And it's interesting. We also have the Kickstarter tie. I knew about that project, but I didn't realize that's your start. And Kickstarter, it really has kickstarted a lot of different things. Your career, my career as a director. And so that's wonderful. It's wonderful that that's how that started.
Yeah.
So how do you find your voice actors? What's your process for that?
Well,
you don't have to give us your secrets, but
sure, yeah. I mean, it's a little different.
How qualified they are, perhaps.
It's if you talk to a lot of voice actors that are, especially, I kind of the people I networked with and was around most in LA were the anime people, right? And so if you go, and they tell their story all the time, a lot of times they fell into it, like people like Steve Bloom and stuff like that, and Richard Epcar. They started off as film actors, and they ended up just seeing this audition or something like that, and it turns out they were just really good at it, right? Okay. So that helped for some people, and then some people, they actually got in. There's at Anime Expo, and now I think there at other conventions they have something called Anime Idol, where they'll have an open competition. Yeah. For people to do, and sometimes the winners will go on. Like the winners usually get something; they get to do one anime, but usually maybe 30%, maybe a third of those winners will go on to really have a career in it. So even then, if you just winning that isn't even enough always to really do it, So it's really random, but with the experience that I have, what I know is, if I hear it, then I know it.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
And so what I did is I went to the local actors groups, and Facebook is such an amazing tool for this, right? I'm part of the I'm in Asheville, so I'm part of the Asheville filmmakers group. I'm part of the Asheville actors group, models group, just anywhere there's talent. And so I put out calls for that. And also some great friends of mine that I know in voiceover, Trish Basani, she's in New Jersey, and she hooked me up. She says there's a ton of voice actors in Asheville already, and so she connected me with them. So I already had like a good 5 or 6 that were really talented, and I asked them, who else do you know? And so I did an open audition, or a general audition, it's sort of called. Yeah. So I actually did one for Disney. They bring you in, and you just read a bunch of characters, and they see what, and then they save you kind of in a file. Right. So I was excited when I went into Disney, and then like COVID happened right after that. So I was like, well, I don't know what's going to happen now. But so I just listened to, I don't know, at first I had like 80 submissions from local actors and recommendations. And then about 50 of them, I went through and I graded them A, B, C, right? And about 50 of them made the cut. Okay. Right? So about 30 of them did not. Right. Yeah. And then I have this A list of about a dozen that I would hold them up against anyone in LA. Right. They have awesome. The chops. So it's this weird mix of, like, part of it, a lot of the A-listers are people who have done a lot of work in commercials. So they have all the technical skills. Like there's a whole, like when I teach voiceover, there's like a whole day or two on technical skills like mic distance and proper vocalization techniques and dynamics and not going too loud or too soft. There's just all these things, and they already have those, right? But other actors, I can hear them and I'm like, this is the feel that I want, and then I can direct them into the rest of what I need, right? Oh yeah. And so after a while, and I don't even know if I can explain it because there's so much art, it's part art, part science, but I can tell that I can direct them into what I want from them.
I completely understand that. Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. And I've had that same experience. We talked before this, right? And we talked about how a lot of the people that I've used are some of those people that have come up and said, hey, if you ever need voice actors, yes, I've used some of those people. But only a couple of those have I ever reused. And then there was one person that back in my theater days, I worked with her, and I just remember she had such a natural stage presence, and I remember her voice was beautiful. And this was a musical piece that I was pitching, and I have a producing partner for, so more news about that coming soon. But yeah, it was interesting because the first time she sent me a recording of her singing the song, it was way off base, right?
Yeah.
But all I had to do was just kind of sing it to her how I thought it should be done, and I have a bit of confidence in my singing voice.
Oh yeah.
And and what she came back with was, oh yeah, she very quickly adapted to that style. So
that's really the best talent is, people who can be directed.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
And there's different types of actors. There's some types that are just really, really, really good at one kind of voice.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
Right. And I'm like, okay, if I really need this, that's my person. And then there's the people that are good at a whole bunch of different things.
Yeah, different voices and
personalities
and
that happened. We need that a lot, especially for games, because you'll get this video game with like 200 characters in it. And, and some of them only have 2 or 3 lines.
Mm-hmm.
But you got to have, and you can't schedule somebody to come into studio and do 3 lines and leave.
Yeah, you got to get more than that.
Right. So you have to, like, all these, what we call incidentals, again, you've got to have somebody who can cover like 10 characters who have 3 lines or something like that, because it's not cost effective to bring them in because there's minimum budgets for these things. Like if you come in, there's a minimum you get paid, whether you work for 10 minutes or 2 hours.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, well, I'm going to give you 2 hours of work then. Right? Or try. To give you. So I actually am doing right now, lately I've been doing 1 hour minimums for my group. So we can do, more cost effective type of stuff. It's tough because like as a producer, you're walking the line between the client who hires you, right? They need to get a certain thing for a certain cost without it being crazy blown up. But then, the actors also, you want to respect them and give them what they should get,
Mm-hmm.
And it's always a push-pull, because if you push things too high up in one direction, then nothing will happen, right? If your prices are too high, the clients won't hire you. If your prices are too low, no actors will work for you. Right. So it's always trying to find this middle ground. So that's why the specialists are really good. So what happens a lot of times, though, is that the people who are good at really one voice, they end up getting the lead roles. And then the multi-role people end up being like 8 other people in the game. Mm-hmm. So it's nice to have both of those. And there's some people, I like to think I'm one of those people who can do both, like who can do a certain, like I'm like young hero kind of is I think my forte, but I also have the ability to go all over the place and do crazy stuff too. So, but that's what I do lately is like, if I'm casting and I can't find someone to do something exactly the way I want, I'm like, I'm just going to do it. That's the advantage.
Me too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Right. I'm just going to do this. I'm just going to do it right now. I'm just going to go in my home booth and just knock this out, and then it'll be done.
Yeah. There's a moment where in this project I told you about where I had this old lady singing, and I was just like, I'm just going to do it. And it turned out to be so good.
Is it like very Monty Python-esque,
No, it was actually pretty good. I would tell people that was me, and they're like, "Really? Let me hear it again."
Nice,
they couldn't tell, so it was pretty cool. Yeah, I used to do a Carol Channing impression when I was a little teenager because I thought she was the funniest. She was the funniest person in the world. Yeah, and then I worked at a scout camp, and this girl who heard me do that impression, she said, one day I walked into the room and I heard you on the TV. And I guess it was Alice in Wonderland or something that she was watching.
Oh, wow.
And, it's pretty funny. I can't do it that well anymore because my voice has gotten lower, but it's fun. It's lots of fun. Something we talked about on the LinkedIn post was the word natural. And I liked how you put that in quotations. It signified to me there's something more to that word than you were actually the actual word. And so let's talk about that. Let's talk about getting the natural vocal performance. My guess is, well, just go ahead. Let's talk about that.
Okay. Yeah, it's sort of this elusive thing.
Yeah.
This whole thing is like half art, half science. So I can describe it to an extent, but then after that, it just has to be felt.
Right. Yeah.
And so what's happening in the industry, and this is everything. This is commercials, this is video games, this is animation. They're all coming across like you don't even like it's just I don't even see them anymore because it's almost every casting call. You know, it's so ubiquitous now. You're just like, yeah, natural voice, blah, blah, blah. You know, like you're just so used to seeing it. It's very rare to see it to not say that now.
Yeah.
So they'll say stuff like not commercially, not salesman-y, not over the top, not cartoony, right? So all those kind of adjectives you get. And you're like, okay, well, what do you want then? Now,
it's not all these things, then you don't know what it is, actually.
Yes.
Yeah.
So they just say like natural read or comfortable read, like not professional voice sounding, you know, again, it's another not. And you're like, huh?
We don't want you to sound professional. Then what am I? Yeah.
Right. So this is what happens. It lives somewhere between your natural speaking voice. Now, the way I'm talking right now is probably closer to that, what they want, because I'm sort of a trained public speaker. So this is not how I would talk to my friends either. Right. Okay. You know, but if you're, so the natural voice is not you sitting in your room talking with your friends. Right. That's not
obviously not. It's boring.
Well, sort of. It's not so much that it's boring. It's just that that's not what they want.
Yeah.
Because this is what they think they want, right? That's what if you ask them a lot of times, they're like, yeah, we want you to sound like just like you were talking with somebody. No, it's not. But they think that, right? But if they heard that, they would be like, oh, that's not what we wanted either. And it's not so much that it's boring. It's just that it lacks certain polish.
Yeah.
Right. So what happens is they want it to be as natural as possible. But in the meantime, you are clearly enunciating every syllable.
Right.
You're keeping a good dynamic range so everything is heard.
Okay.
And there is this subtle conveyance of an emotion or a feeling along with the performance that goes in there. So it's like it's somewhere halfway between like this sort of commercial or animation voice and your real voice.
Yeah.
But it has to be really like those things. It has to be really enunciated, really polished. But there's also sort of this, there's a little bit of performance to it.
Yeah.
And it's weird. I think what people have sort of been trained for this. It's so interesting how I could talk about this for a long time, but you know it too, because, you know, working in animation, people are trained for things like cuts and fade ins and fade outs. We know what this means. We know what an establishing shot means, right? Like if you're watching a movie and they show the outside of a building and then they show people in an office, you're like, they're in that building.
Yeah.
But if you took somebody from like medieval times and showed them a movie, you know, once they got over their horrific terror of the magic box of doom or whatever, right? You know, and tried to have them understand, they're like, I don't know, they showed this building and then there was people inside a room, you know, they might not even connect that, right?
Yeah.
So sort of the same thing is happening with this voiceover where people are getting used to this sort of natural yet not natural voice.
Yeah.
And saying, oh, that's the thing, you know, and that's the sweet sauce or whatever. And so I had some, you know, you see this a lot. Oh man, I actually had some, because I do when I occasionally I teach voiceover to, you know, students, and I have links in my class to these videos. There's a lot, you know, some commercials like the new these new like IBM commercials. They're just like, you need solutions. We have them for you, you know, and it's just like, it's just the music's all peaceful and it just feels like you're sitting in a room with somebody, they're just talking to you casually, you know, but it's still really professional, but it also just feels really natural, you know. It's sort of a reaction, I think, to the older, like, you know, if you watch like cartoons from the 80s and 90s and like everything's crazy over the top and the commercials back then were like, order now, you know, it's just like, and our brains are kind of had been tuned, the, you know, older people who've been around for that, to be like, that's a commercial, I'm not listening to that, and we tune it out.
Yeah.
So I think now that's part of the reason they're shifting to this natural voice type thing too. But also a lot of people watching animation are adults, right? You know, it's really moved into adulthood that people still watch animation, and they don't want kiddie performances. They want to feel like I'm watching an adult cartoon or whatever, you know, like just
something more authentic, or I don't know.
Yeah, right. It doesn't matter if you like cartoons.
Let me draw a couple parallels though and see what you think of them. The reason I use boring is I was thinking of screenwriting, right? If you just took a slice of life, like you just took this thing that you just watched happen on the street, most of the time that would be what I would term boring.
I see.
But it's because it wouldn't capture your interest enough. Another analogy I was thinking of was like photography. Like you could take somebody who is a newbie and somebody who's an amazing photographer, put them next to each other and have them take nearly the same picture, and there'd be a huge difference in the quality of those pictures.
Yeah.
And both of them would be the natural picture, right?
Right.
But there's a level of quality there. Another thing I was thinking is, in my experience, and this might be wrong, but one of the things that gets natural acting is just not going with the first take too sometimes. It's sometimes pushing past that first take and, like you said, directing the actor a bit and seeing where the boundaries are of this performance and getting a better read that way. Yeah,
well, you reminded me of something very interesting.
Okay.
So, and I think the photograph analogy is really good for this.
Okay, cool, cool.
I really like that analogy. So I talk about anime because that's what I'm sort of kind of came from originally. And anime is like, and it's ADR, it's dubbing, as we can get into more later. But they're like the lowest budget animation, pretty much. And I'm not sure why dubbing is always so low budget. I think it's because they're like, well, we already have an original performance that we paid for, so now we're paying for another one. What I'm paying. So it's super low budget for anime, and they want you to nail it on the first take.
Yeah.
And maybe the second one. And if you can't do that, then they'll find somebody else, right? And so you're in there, you're doing, it's like all this pressure, because you're like, okay, I got to give good performance, do my technique correctly, all the technical stuff, and I got to match the mouth movements, and I got to do it the first time,
right?
And you get in the zone. Once you've done it enough times, you kind of get in the zone, and it might take a little while to warm up. It does for me, but then you get in the zone, you do it, but it's really tough, and you just go. Yeah. And then I did this kids animation called Ella Bella Bingo, and it's really cool. I play one of the dads in there. I play Johnny's dad, right? And I don't remember what actually voice. I remember I kind of based him on Bill Lumbergh though, which was kind of fun. Just kind of like but a little more natural sounding Bill Lumbergh. And so what happened is this director was basically done stuff for Disney. And he comes in and he's like, okay, let's listen to what you're going to do. Like, okay. And he spent just 20 minutes with me tweaking the voice that he wanted. 20 minutes, right?
Yeah.
And then we did like 10 takes for every line. And he'd stop and he'd think about it. And he'd give me some feedback and he'd think about it. And, and I'm like, this is so different. But I feel like we got a really good performance. So, and that's kind of the thing. And then, of course, sort of in between the middle of that is maybe video games where you traditionally do 2 takes for every one. It's just kind of standard. You do 2 takes. You give the director 2 slightly different takes. This is something I teach in my voiceover class. I'm like, okay. There should be significantly different. You can tell the difference, but not wildly different, right? You're not going off in different directions with performance, but you give them 2 takes. And then usually what happens is they turn to the engineer and they go, keep 1. Okay. Keep 2. Okay. And they'll tell the engineer which one to keep. They'll drop it into the keeper track and then you move on. Now, if the director doesn't like it, then he stops and says, no, we need more of a happy read, or we need, whatever you do.
Yeah.
Then you do 1 more in that case. Yeah. So, but I think, in original animation, it's a lot like that too, where you can do a few and take your time for that because you're not on these crazy dubbing budget constraints.
Right.
Yep.
Wow. That's cool. It's cool to hear that process. It's really great. Getting in, well, now that we're in process, let's talk about directing. So we had in our interactions beforehand, we had this discussion about how, for me, in all my acting experience, and I would like to be part of the directing, if not the director of the voice acting. But if I hired somebody like you would want to be part of the directing because you know your actors and that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, obviously when collaboration happens, there's these moments of clash and there's these moments of synergy. How do we avoid the moments of clash that, like you said, will make it take double the time?
Yes.
And get into those moments of synergy. If there were two, like if I were a director and I were having you direct the voice acting.
Okay, well, let me go back and just give you or the listeners more specifically, right? An idea of what happens, because you know, if it was you and me, it would probably be very different than a standard. What would standard happen, right? Because we both sort of I have producing animation training, and you have voice acting and stuff directing training, so we overlap a lot. But traditionally, that's not what happens. And I've given talks, especially like CTN Expo. I've been there a couple of times now to tell animators about the process, because a lot of times it's more of an afterthought. They're really good and they can direct, because directing animation traditionally means you're responsible for the feel and the content and the color and the timing of the animation itself. Right. You know, and you're directing the artists and everything like that. But a lot of times there's a separate director for the voiceover. Right? Now there's a few people who do both, but most of the time it's such a big job. Like, you have to know a ton to direct an animation, to organize all the art and the feel and the timing and all that stuff.
The storyboards, every department.
Like, that's a whole job. Like, you really shouldn't have to know or be expected to know how to do the voiceover. Right. You just bring someone else in. That's what's normal for that in any kind of studio, with a big team and all that kind of thing. Right.
Okay.
And so that's a lot of the stuff to know. But a lot of times voiceover becomes like sort of this, oh, okay, well, now that I'm done, for more indie projects, I'll just go out on the internet and grab a bunch of random actors, and then we'll have them do performances, and so and that's why I tell them not to do that, because you're going to get a variety of all these different microphones. You're going to, since you haven't hired a company like my company, I'll have a contract with you and I have to deliver. But if you hire random people off the internet, they'll flake, they'll disappear, they'll give you bad performances, they'll have a demo that doesn't reflect their actual acting ability. Because they did, 100,000 takes and, took the one good one out of the 100 bad ones, because you can do that, just like with photography, right? People take 1 million pictures for headshots and one makes them look amazing, but they don't really look like that. Right? The same kind of thing. So if you don't know about what, the stuff, you could go out there and try to just hire random people on the internet. And you don't know what you're going to get. You might get lucky, but you don't know. And then who's directing it? A lot of people don't even direct it. They're just like, oh, here, voice actor, here's the script. Just give me some reads and give it back. But you need a director to have a vision, just like for the animation, of how it feels. There's a tone, right? Yeah.
Well, even in animation, so you'll have the main director and you'll also have the director over animation.
Yes.
Character specific, and then the director over effects specific, and then the director over storyboards, and you'll have that's the head of story often.
Yeah, if you have a big studio, yes.
You'll have an art director over character design, and art director over background design. You'll have a bunch of different. You'll have a technical director, right? Or well, that technical director is actually a smaller level, but you'd have a director over the technical team. So so this would be just like having a director over the voice actors.
Right. Yeah. I mean, so they, so the director, and their job is to look at the script, right? Read the script, see whatever you got. Now for original animation, honestly, the voice acting should come before you animate, right? Because you're animating to the voices.
Yeah. And the feel too. You listen to that audio over and over as an animator.
Yeah. So
it's what inspires the performance. So
hopefully, yeah. I mean, some people actually try to do it afterwards, but indie stuff, right? But anyway, so you get in there. The director should read the script, see the concept art, and know the feel and the tone of the thing, right? So then they can put the actors in, because it's not my project, right? I'm putting them into your world,
right?
That you make. So it's so important to have a director that understands that they're not going to be like, I'm just going to make this into whatever I want. That's not the thing, right? You get the feel for the show or whatever it is, and then you put the actors in it, and that's going to affect casting too, right? If I've read the script and I understand things, and that affects casting. So that gets in there. So we get a cast that has the feel for it. And then, casting works different way. But if anyone's curious, this is how casting generally works: is for the lead roles, the client would pretend it's you, right? And so what I would do is I would send you my top 3 for each of the lead roles.
Okay.
Right. So I'm filtering out, so you don't have to listen to everybody. I'm just going to give you the 3 best ones, and you pick.
Less work for me. Sounds
yes.
great.
And then the minor roles, I just cast them. Right. So, so you're just, usually this is how they want it, because it could be a ton of minor, like 3-line roles or whatever. You don't want to hear the duck that has 3 lines or whatever, So, as long as you trust me at some point, right? And that's generally
to be the duck who has 3 lines.
Right. Yeah. You're just like, I'm going to go be this duck. Yeah. So we send the top 3 for the main characters, and I usually have the client identify who are the main characters, right? These, and it's usually like 5 to 8.
Okay.
Right? You get the top 3. You send me every once in a while. They're like, we don't like any of them. All right.
Back to square one. Yeah.
So that happens.
Yeah.
And then so then I end up casting all the minor roles and things like that. And so then I've got that, and then you bring the actors in the studio, and then what happens a lot of the times, or most of the time, is that if it's a student that's working on a lot of projects or whatever, then they just let me go and I do it. Okay. And I get in there and I get the feel, and I'll check if I have any questions about anything, though. I check with the client, right? I would call you and be like, I'm not sure what the feel is for this, or why is this scene happening, or, whatever. And some things, it happens every time. You read the script, you look at things, but then when they read the lines out loud, you're like, oh, I have a question. Right? Even though you read the script, when they do it out loud, you're like, oh, wait, does that make sense, or whatever, and you're trying to figure it. It always happens. So, you call up the client or whatever. And so that's how I normally do it. A lot of times what will happen too is the client will come on for the very beginning, right? We'll patch them into the studio so the actor can hear him in the headphones. We can hear him in the control booth. And then we'll do the first few lines together. And the client will be like, okay, that's good. Or maybe they might have some, I want him to sound a little older, or something like that. And then, okay, good. And then we kind of lock it in. And then the client will be like, okay, see you. And I like that. That's good too, right? I don't mind that. But what happened this one time, so this actually, and this isn't a bad thing, right? I mean, it's like the client's paying for this. The client gets what they want, right?
Right, yeah.
But I think a lot of directors, if they don't really trust the voice person, the voice director, or then they want to be there the whole time.
Yeah.
And they'll be physically there in the room, or they'll be patched in through Skype, right? And and I've sort of had the thing happen where you've had the client who comes on at the beginning, and then they just stay. Oh, I'm just gonna hang out and listen. And then what happens is you have 2 directors.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And now after every line, not only your input, but then the other. So it has to clear 2 people. And so this makes it take twice as long.
Yes.
Right. I mean, there was one anime that I worked on where the Japanese creator of the anime, amazing guy, came over and he's like, oh, I'm going to be in town while you're doing it. So I'm just going to be there. So the Japanese guy is there in the studio with the director. And I'm not directing, I'm producing on this one. But if he has a comment, then it has to be translated into English. So it's even longer, right? So somebody will do a take, and then the Japanese director says something, translate it, oh, okay, and so there's this long pauses between each take, that take a long time, and then we have kind of a standard. I know how many lines we can do in an hour. Right, that's like a big thing, and there's different people break it up different ways, but generally anime and video games, we go by lines or loops, they call them, right, which is just everybody's breaking a dialogue, right, and I've done a whole bunch of math. I have Excel spreadsheets because I'm a computer science guy originally, so I have these complicated calculations that tell me exactly how many hours it should take, and and I even did statistics on my different actors about exactly how many they do on average in an hour, so I can make these calculations. I don't think anyone else does this. I don't know. But
it sounds cool, but
yeah,
that kind of work that it's almost too much trouble for a lot of people. So, but it's very useful. Sounds.
Right. Yeah. So it's very good for budgeting because I can get really close to exactly how much time we're going to be in the studio. So the important thing is that if I have double directing or I have the animation producer or director coming in and commenting on every single line, it pretty much doubles the time of that. Right. So what I prefer is sort of that. I mean, if they really trust me, then letting me go and play, and that's fine. I just do it, right? But I don't mind let's connect at the beginning of the session with the actor and make sure that the voice is what you want, right? And you listen for the first few lines, and then you're like, okay, great, I'm gonna let you guys go. I love that part. I'm like, good. I know the client's satisfied, and now I can really get some work done.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
So, and I'm not mad at them for wanting that or anything. It's just a relief to really like, okay, now we're gonna get some work done. We're gonna get this train's really gonna start rolling now.
Yeah. We can get in our zone.
Yeah, exactly. Right. I mean, you just get going and and so but it's different with every client. You just got to work with them.
Yeah, that makes sense. Do you ever have the experience where you get to listen to an animatic that has temp voices in it? And
you mean like a scratch track?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sure. Yeah.
And how does that process go? Is it inspiring, or does it sometimes? Because I know with temp music that oftentimes directors will become married to that temp music, and it's very difficult for them to get outside of that. We had that discussion with the composers that I interviewed in the past, and I imagine that could possibly happen with voiceover as well.
So you're just asking about the music, not a vocal track?
No, a vocal track, yeah. So if you have the animatic, usually it's a bunch of storyboards, right? And you have some temp voices that they grabbed people around the studio and created this thing, and now they're like, okay, you can watch that, and then that could inspire performances.
Okay, good. So I think my answer is going to be a little complicated.
That's okay.
Yeah.
We're wanting to go deep and complicated in this show. So
yes. So scratch track, right? I mean, that's generally for timing, right? I mean, you're going to know this probably better than me, right? The scratch track is you get some people to read so you can start animating, or just get the timing of how long it's going to take. How long does it take for someone to say this sentence, right?
Yeah.
Well, most of the time, scratch tracks are done like by. It's really weird, but like studios do this all the time. They just grab office workers.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Hey, Bill, you done with that Excel? Come in here and read these lines, right? And so they don't really help us any because they're usually bad, but they're very fun to listen to.
Yeah,
it's so funny, because this is Bill the accountant. Trying to be like Sapphire the cat or something. And, it's amazingly hilarious. So it is, but we don't need it for anything. The only time there's one project I worked on, it's very unusual, kids movie. I played a wolf, talking wolf, obviously. And it was made in China, but they meant it to be released in English. So they had someone do a scratch track that they animated to, right?
Sounds like it'll be fun.
So the scratch track was actually helpful for the dubbing because it has the timing of the sentence for it that they animated to, right?
Okay.
Whereas usually the scratch track is just for timing of like scene changes, or from what I understand, right?
It's just kind of to time out the whole movie.
Yeah, you're not doing the mouth movements to the scratch track because then you've limited your actors to dubbing, basically. So, but this one, was pretty lined up with what they were saying. So it was helpful in some sense to hear that, because it kind of helps. It's almost like having a cheat for the timing, so you can just say it at the same timing as the other actor. But I think for different people, it's going to be different, right? Some people that might be more helpful than others. But generally speaking, we wouldn't want to hear the scratch track. But I do love having an M&E. Like if you have M&E, it's really nice to hear that when we're recording, right? Because that gives you a feel for it. So if you do have an animatic with music and sound effects or anything like that, it feels like you're there, So it's like an actor being on set for a film when you've got everything around you and everybody's dressed like dwarves and orcs or whatever, you're like, I'm really there, So I feel like that does that does help. And anything, because like a lot of these stuff, like I'd say a good half of it, you don't see anything. You see words. Like we don't see even pictures or concept art of some of the characters we're playing.
Right.
You know, you just get a paragraph that describes who they are, and you've got to imagine the character from that. And so it's nice to have anything else to really add to it.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's cool too. There were, as you were talking, there were stories that I've heard of, well, that are very in the forefront if you look. But you have Lou Romano in Ratatouille and in The Incredibles that he read the scratch line, and it was so good he ended up reading the actual line. Rhino in Bolt was another one where Rhino, Mark Walton, I think is his name. He was the story artist, and so of course he played the voice of Rhino, and then he ended up being Rhino in the movie. So
wow,
yeah. But I think that's pretty rare because I've seen some animatics where I'm like, oh yeah, I'm glad they re-recorded that voice because it wasn't very good.
Yeah, it's sort of like lightning striking kind of thing, kind of rare.
Yeah, so what it seems like is lightning striking. So
yeah.
Awesome. So what kind of changes would you like to see in the industry that would make the industry a better place for voice actors, for animators, anyone working in it?
Wow, that's a good question. I've been working with kind of the idea of where everything is very blocky in terms of like how the voice acting works. Like if you get cast for a role, there's like this, okay, well, you got this, there's like this 2-hour minimum block that we have to hire you for, right? And there's these standard rates, no matter what, we have to. And what that does is it sort of kind of creates this elite where the same people are going to get the work over and over again. And the other people, it's really hard for them to get in. Like, and especially for whatever reason, I think it's because of budgeting, really. Like, I don't understand why a studio will spend millions. This is literally an example, right? They will spend millions on an animation, and then they will balk at spending 50 grand for the voiceover.
Right.
And I'm like, what? Like, and so that's part of the problem where we have to try to like squeeze these things into budgets where, we end up with these really bizarre things. Like I have to try to cast people as multiple roles as often as possible to fit these blocks to fill them up. So we're not wasting time for these minimums and that kind of thing. But I don't understand why they won't spend money. I'm watching a Netflix show recently, and Netflix is so hit or miss. Like some of their shows are just spot on. Like Blood of Zeus. Really, I was like, this is great. Like in terms of voiceover, right? And then some other shows which I won't mention. But they're like, what? They got the show, and it's set in a fantasy world, and half the people are British and half the people are American, like contemporary American. Okay. And they'll be in the same scene. They'll just be like, oh yeah, what do you think you're doing? Well, I'm doing, it's just like, what? It's a huge contrast. And you're like, it doesn't make sense. And then you've got this mix of cartoony voices with more natural voices. And I'm like, wow, but I think part of the problem is they're not paying enough to get. And it wouldn't be much, like if they just spent like 75,000 instead of 50,000 or whatever, just added 50% to the budget, they could give the directors and casters, and we'd have more studio time, and we'd have more time to take with the script and really do something good. And it's not like we're asking for that. Now I do that stuff anyway. Like if you hired me in my company to do a fantasy animation, right? I would make sure that all the accents worked in a way that made sense, right? I would make sure that performances didn't go from contemporary to medieval and all those kind of things that really just drive me nuts, and
break the spell.
Yeah, exactly, right? I mean, you've got that whole verisimilitude. So I think that's a big thing where there's not enough budget spent on these things, and so you end up with the really good animation, and then the voiceover is not so great, even from like Netflix and things like that, because they've got this weird model where you don't spend on the voices. And I'm like, wow, why did you spend all this money? If you want to make this look so good, and then be like, we don't care about the voices or what. I'm like, why? It's just so frustrating. I don't understand it. So yeah, I guess that would be a thing.
Yeah.
But also, I'm trying to do. I want to innovate, and it's going to take me a while because I'm rebuilding the company here, from scratch, and I've got to get some contracts and get some more cred and some, stuff like that. But I eventually want to redo how dubbing is done. Right? I want to invent a new way to do dubbing.
Awesome.
Because the way we're doing it is rough. It's really rough. And besides the budgeting, right? There's got to be a way to especially involve technology in doing dubbing where we don't do it. Now, there's a software right now called VoiceQ. Have you heard of VoiceQ?
I haven't, no. Okay,
so VoiceQ, it's okay. You can plug in the start time and the end time for a line, right? You have to do it manually. You have to have either from the client, you have to have a list of the time codes, or you have to figure it out and go in and watch the thing and write down all the time codes, which that takes a lot of time. That could be automated, right? But anyway, but VoiceQ, you put in the start of the line and the end of the line, and what it does is it shows the actor during the clip. The words will go across the bottom of the screen, and there's a dot in the middle that shows you when to say each word. So because there's so many different kinds of dubbing, you can get into this, but the basic dubbing style that is sort of the low end is, okay, the sound starts when their mouth opens, and then at the end of the line, when it closes, you finish. Okay. That's the basic dubbing, right? And then there's things like, what if they pause in the middle, right? And some dubs don't care. They just keep going, and even though the actor's mouth is closed for a second, but then, the next level, usually anime is in that second level where you get the pauses also, right?
Okay.
And then there's like another level where you try to match the mouth shapes, which is what we did for Beta and Cora. And it was in Spanish, right? So all these sentences ended with O. Oh, right. So I had to adapt. There's something called adaptation that happens in dubbing, right? We can talk more about dubbing, but you get the translation, and then there's another step, which I do, is adaptation, where you have to adapt that line because, Spanish, there's a lot more syllables than English. Yeah. In general sentences, right? So I had to write the English to be longer, because if you said it in English, they'd be done talking and the mouth would still be moving for twice as long, right? Yeah, so that's adaptation. And then in the adaptation, I had to add all these O words at the end of sentences. Yeah. Right? So they had to end with to and you and stuff like all the time, because the little it's so obvious in the stop motion that their mouth was like a big O, right? Yeah. And so we couldn't have
just in my mind practicing saying man.
Yeah,
man, right. Just making the O sound.
Yeah, I mean, you have to. So like, you can't end it with like if they have an O, mouth. Yeah. It just doesn't look right. So I had to do that's like another layer. So there's all these different layers of dubbing. But some of this can be automated. Now, VoiceQ is the beginning of it, but I feel like we can use AI to determine like the start and stop times, dump them in, and then also use it to insert pauses and stuff like that. I think there's a lot more we could do to make dubbing so that the actor can, and it's a great skill. Some actors if they can do this, which is really hard. And like I said, I can do it, but it's really difficult, and you're doing like 5 things at once to match the lip flaps and the get the performance and the everything.
It sounds
and listen to what the director just said, like, oh, what did they just say? So I would like to also find, if I find some time and some money to throw at maybe some developers to create a better version of like VoiceQ or whatever, where it also will kind of adapt itself and save you time putting in the information and stuff like that too.
Yeah, you might even want to find some developers who have an entrepreneurial savvy or background too. We can talk about that after.
Yeah.
So we actually gone over time a bit, and
I thought it was an hour. I'm sorry.
No, it's 45 minutes, but that's okay. I still want to ask the Get Wiser moment. Usually this question is phrased to producers about how do I get the highest clarity of truth into a story? For you specifically, I would like to ask, as a director, how do we get the highest clarity of truth into a vocal performance?
Wow. Well, I think it has to start with, a vision of that, like I talked about earlier, that tone where you feel this is the tone of the show. And how many, you're watching a show and you're like, oh, what if this happens? You're like, no, it's not that kind of show, right? You know, like there's things that don't fall in within that show, and so you have to. So to have this final vision, this performance, is everyone has to be in the world.
Okay.
Right, in terms of their accents and their delivery and their feel, they all have to be not just in the genre, which is step one, right? That even those Netflix shows didn't do, but and then step two, in the world. Everyone's got to be in the world, and you need a director who can see that. Yeah. And the director sees that and keeps everybody in the world, and you can you feel it when they step out, and you're like, oh no, we got to go this way, or we got to go that way.
Cool.
And you direct them back, and you keep them in the world, and then when you're done, you have this performance. They're talking to each other, even though you recorded them at different times, right? It feels like they're in the room together. Yeah.
Yeah, I actually was going, you were taking me back to my theater days when we would do ensemble, like trust exercises and different things to make sure we had that synergy as an ensemble. And that's awesome. But that's up to the director, it sounds like, the director's vision. Yeah. And being very sensitive to that don't break the spell of we're in this world. And if we step out, then we can bring ourselves back in somehow. Yeah, that's cool. I love your perspective on that. That's great.
Well, good. Well, thanks.
Well, awesome. So let's wrap up here. Where can people find you? I have your website down in the notes of the show.
Yes.
The marvelousspiralstudios.com, I believe is what it is.
That's it. Yeah.
And is there any other place you'd like people to follow you?
We have so the contact form is on the Marvelous Spiral Studios website. And I do, I'm not huge into social media, but I do have a Twitter, so you can find me on Twitter. If you put Stephen Weese in, it should come up. And the Twitter handle is Steve Racer because I'm a big Speed Racer fan, so my nickname is Steve Racer. But you can find me there too if you want to. Twitter is mostly for I'll post voiceover stuff and make weird jokes, but that's pretty much it.
Weird, very short jokes. Yeah. So another thing, just so people know what's coming up, in June, we're going to have an interview with Daniel Harmon. He is the CEO or the Chief Creative Officer at Angel Studios. They're also the Harmon brothers, if you know that brand. They created the Poopery commercial, the Squatty Potty, the Purple Mattress. They're just amazing marketers and storytellers. And now they have shows like The Chosen and Tuttle Twins, which is the biggest crowdfunded animation project of all time now. $2 million, I think they're at. So I'm really excited to interview him next month. And then July is going to be a little bit different, where I'm actually going to talk about the 7 pitches that I've been planning to release here this year. So that'll be exciting. We'll talk about the feedback process and different things I learned about development during the course of all of the pitches that I have developed so far. So thank you for tuning in. And until next time, I hope that we all get a little wiser.
You have been watching the Directing Animation Livecast with Scott Weiser. Audio version edited by Kiera Horowitz. Copyright Scott Weiser LLC 2020.